there were no states who were talking about pursuing fully autonomous weapons. Every state indicated that they thought there was a need for continued discussions. Every state indicated that there were concerns that were real and compelling and that needed to be addressed. Of course, there's no consensus yet on how to address these weapons. But by my count, nearly 2/3 of the government statements mentioned the need for meaningful human control. And of course, we had a handful who explicitly called for a preemptive ban on the weapons. No one said that they had to have fully autonomous weapons. None said that they were actively pursuing them. But of course, the reality is that there are states who find the notion of fully autonomous weapons tempting. And indeed, there are states who are pursuing them in one fashion or another. Indeed, most major military powers are moving toward ever greater autonomy in weapons systems, and there are no stop signs in the road. There is something of a disconnect between no one being willing at this point to acknowledge that they are actively pursuing fully autonomous weapons, and yet we're going to have very lengthy discussions on the pros and cons of such systems. We're going to have lengthy discussions on the technical possibilities of bringing these systems forward, lengthy discussions on the military utility, usefulness of such systems. This disconnect points toward the need for greater transparency at the very least. It also points toward the need for national policies. The statements that we heard this morning were a good start, but governments need to further develop their positions and formalize their policies. Of course, we would like to see those policies include a prohibition or a moratorium on the development, production, or use of fully autonomous weapons. In that respect, we were very pleased, as my colleague from Article 36 mentioned, with the high number of references to meaningful human control. In our view, if you believe there must be meaningful human control, in fact, you support a preemptive ban on fully autonomous weapons. If you require meaningful human control, you, in fact, are banning fully autonomous weapons. If that's the case, you should go ahead and call for such a prohibition, or the positive obligation to have meaningful human control. We also heard a lot about definitions and the need for definitions. In fact, at this point, it's a formal definition that would be premature, not the other way around, that our work is premature without a definition. The definition would be premature. As many in this room are aware, definitions are always the very last thing that are agreed to in weapons-oriented negotiations. It's not until you get to the end of the line that you truly decide what may be in, what may be out, what may be counted, what may not be counted. At this point, we need to further refine the concepts of lethal autonomous weapon systems, of meaningful human control, or a number of other aspects of this work. It's just what the CCW should be really good at through its expert work, is developing concepts and moving them toward becoming formal definitions. Another important point that I was pleased to hear a number of delegations refer to was the need to not only look at international humanitarian law, but also international human rights law. There's no question that if fully autonomous weapons were ever to be fielded, they would not just be used in situations of armed conflict. They would also be used in domestic law enforcement, riot control, and other policing activities. So we're glad that there's space on the agenda this week for explicit discussion of human rights law, but there should also be space, for example, on the agenda of the Human Rights Council to address this aspect of fully autonomous weapons. Another important point is accountability. Those of you who were able to join us for the Campaign to Stop Killer Robots lunchtime side event know that Human Rights Watch has just put out a new report on accountability, Mind the Gap. This report details the significant hurdles to assigning personal accountability for the actions of fully autonomous weapons under both criminal and civil law. It also elaborates on the consequences of failing to assign legal responsibility. It concludes that programmers, manufacturers, and military personnel could all escape liability for unlawful deaths and injuries caused by fully autonomous weapons. The lack of meaningful human control that characterizes such weapons would make it difficult to hold anyone criminally liable for such unlawful actions. And no accountability means no deterrence of future crimes, no retribution for victims, no social condemnation of the responsible party. And these many obstacles to justice for potential victims emphasize the reason why we urgently need to ban fully autonomous weapons. Finally, it's fair to ask the question, what is the objective of all this work? Why are people spending as much time as they are, both during this week and in preparations for this week and in months of consultations? What are you working toward? The CCW should not just exist as a talking shop or a discussion forum. It should always be aimed at concrete outcomes. You have a lot of work to do this week in learning more and coming to a common understandings on aspects of this issue. But it's not too early to be thinking about November, or indeed even the 2016 review conference. We're pleased to hear a number of delegations mention both of those facts. In our view, you should be prepared in November. If you're going to address this issue with the urgency that is really needed and required, you should come prepared in November to agree to a new mandate that is much more ambitious, that calls for a formal group of governmental experts to carry out the work, that it should be 3 or 4 weeks of work, not 4 or 5 days, and that should be undertaken with a view to future negotiations, setting the stage for agreement at the end of 2016 at the review conference to agree to a formal negotiating mandate. It's this path that would prove the relevance and effectiveness of the CCW, but more importantly, it is this path that would best serve humankind. Thank you.